Ladies, gentlemen, and blades of all ages, Stellar Blade has officially released as of today, and with a whole host of people diving into the game for the first time, I thought it pertinent to get into how to just get better and stronger at the game as quickly as you possibly can in the early game sections, because a ton of people seem to think that this game is purely about the visuals, but the truth is, there is a really satisfying and deep combat system inside of it, and when it comes to certain enemies, especially early on, you can really find quite a bit of challenge with it on the standard difficulty as well. First things first, then, you probably won't be a god at this game in your first hour, so don't feel discouraged immediately. The timings on things like the dodge iframes, the parries, and the way that the animations flow as a whole, the distinction between guardable attacks, unguardable attacks, and blink dodgeable attacks is a unique thing to adjust to as well. And as a result of all these things, regardless of your experience with other games in the same or similar genres, it just might take a little bit before you adjust to these systems in this game, and I just want to say that's okay. It'll click the more you play it. That said, the first piece of advice that I can really give you is on a similar wavelength. Don't just spam buttons. I know it can look like the kind of game where you can get away with that. It can be a bit visually deceptive in that way, but unless you're going to play on story difficulty easy mode, spamming buttons is just going to get you nowhere fast. The gameplay may look extremely fast-paced in the animations and when watching other people play, but it's also very deliberate when it's in your own hands. It's quite palpable once you've got the controller there. Past that, the absolute biggest tip that I can give you is simply get good at the parrying, dodging, and blink dodge. To explain what these are in general, for those who haven't made it that far yet, you have a block that negates most damage, but if you time your block properly on an incoming attack, you perfect parry. Enemies have green circles under their health bar, perfect parry them once per green circle, and you get to do a retribution attack, which is a sort of critical animation unique to each enemy type. You can also dodge attacks, and the first skill that the game forces you to unlock is perfect dodge to add iframes and bonus effects to that animation. And this is important as any attack that flashes yellow cannot be parried, and thus must be avoided with dodging or positioning. Then the second force skill is blink. You can only use this against unguardable and undodgeable attacks that flash blue beforehand. It positions you behind your enemy, and then you can attack them in the back. Essentially, what the system though is straight up saying when you have all these pieces put together is that your main defensive trick is to parry. The game wants you to parry above all else, and you get a ton of rewards when you do so properly. The second priority is dodging, as you can dodge a number of attacks that cannot be parried. The blink is a much more rare circumstance use, but the trick with that is simply remembering that it exists and what it is for, so that you can execute it correctly when the time comes. Master these three mechanics and the game will be easy as pie in an instant from the moment that you do. That said, there are some attacks that are unparryable and are dodgeable, but really difficult to dodge because the attack's damage collision frames are just longer than the dodge iframes. In moments like those, the best way to avoid damage is literally to run away or just position yourself between the actual damage range of the attack. So never forget that physical movement is its own defensive tool, not just the literal block and dodge buttons. But on a similar note to that too, I actually want to talk about the hitboxes for this game. They are insanely accurate, like to a level that surpasses my expectations of most video games in similar genres or combat styles, to a point of being actually impressive, honestly. What this means is when enemies do an attack, the actual areas that are safe are very visually obvious. If one of your own attack animations make you duck a little bit, it can actually make you literally avoid higher aimed attacks. If one of your attacks makes you jump and do a flip, which a lot of them actually do, it can make you avoid low aimed incoming damage. The point being, the combat is flashy as all hell on the surface, but part of what makes this game actually really work in its favor and the combat feeling so satisfying is the crazy acrobatic animations that you do all have really accurate hitboxes, which means as you learn your own animations, your own combos, and then you also learn enemy types and their attack patterns, you can genuinely avoid a ton of incoming damage without actively doing anything defensive at all, just genuinely body position changing through your own attacks. And while this will be a finer skill to master, absolutely, I don't expect you to work that out in the first couple of hours, it is something worth knowing about and worth knowing that it exists early on so you can start training that skill. Then before we get to a bit more specific stuff, I do want to point out one more thing for just general combat posturing, which is considering your angle of engagement. Some of the levels in this game are pretty straightforward, quite linear, but a lot of them for the most part are semi-open world, which means that you can approach fights from different angles to whatever suits you best, such as potentially finding an elevated position and doing a drop attack, for example, for significant damage. It's not necessarily the most complex tip to take into mind and actually work into your playstyle, but it can definitely make a large difference if you weren't doing it before. Then let's talk about how to actually upgrade your character, especially at the start. As you fight enemies, you gain experience towards skill points, and then you can spend these skill points on upgrades in the appropriate menu. Early on in the game, there are only 3 skill trees available: attack, which just affects your regular attack combos and options, but this feeds back into the hitbox conversation because again, more more attack options also alters your ability to just use these reactively and avoid damage, but again, that's sort of a later game skill. There's the beta skill tree, which is all about the beta skills. These are what lets you spend the energy that you gain from just being successful in combat in general on a high damage, elemental, bursty attacks. And then there's the survival tree for things like dodging and parrying focusing. While a lot of people tend to jump into a game like this and want to prioritize attack immediately and forever, I absolutely don't recommend doing that. I think you should spend a lot more time in the survival section, especially early on. Obviously, the game does force your first 2 points to go there, but by far the biggest blocker in this game will be your defense, not your offense. And given there are literally options in the skill tree to extend the window on your perfect parry and perfect dodge, literally making it easier to do both of these in the first place, I think those should always be the highest priority. So my general advice is just generally to stick to survivability upgrades in the early game until you start to feel like you are genuinely comfortable in every combat that you take part in. Then start spending out to actual beta and attack trees afterwards. And if you're good enough at parrying and dodging, things like the beta skills will become even stronger as well, because that means you'll be charging them a lot quicker. Then our final tip isn't really about combat at all actually, but more so about the story, at least sort of. It's about being, well, it's mentally strong in a way, you know? The game can go a bit out of its way to use a million terms or mention a ton of places or things that you simply won't understand in the slightest early on. Things like the Natiba as a name doesn't mean anything to you, right? But you shouldn't get overwhelmed by this. It'll all make sense eventually as you play the game more. Let's just say the confusion of all these things isn't just because we're new here. It wouldn't help if I just explained it to you right now. It's an actual part of the narrative device driving the story forwards as you play. So don't let it overwhelm you so much as just take it in as you go, and remember that it will actually explain itself eventually. On a similar wavelength, don't ignore the story either. I know there are a lot of people that are diving into this game, into Stellar Blade, purely for the visuals and the combat as a next-gen game, but the story may well surprise you if you actually give it the attention it deserves and give it the respect and time to actually breathe and play out in front of you. That just about does it for today then, everyone. Just a bit of a collection of tips for getting stronger and better within Stellar Blade, which has released today, as quickly as you possibly can, delivered in the most spoiler-free way that I possibly could, using no footage outside of the demo. I hope you've enjoyed this then, and hopefully it helps you conquer your demons early on within your playthrough, or I suppose conquer your Natiba? Like you like the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world our stage. Goodbye.